once we had the advent of federal deposit insurance, and once that deposit insurance came to be so heavily subsidized, I would add to Anat's list of the way that we subsidize and support the banking system, the Federal Home Loan Bank system.
Oh yeah, the secret.
So we've got all sorts of these mechanisms that essentially subsidize banks, and of course they're going to fight to reduce their equity, because reducing equity increases return on equity, and that increases share price, it increases executive compensation, and so that's where the political fight is now. We are subsidizing banks in many different ways. The banks don't want to have to put their own skin in the game by raising equity, and that's where the fight came that the ranking member referred to.
Return on equity on the downside becomes less negative. It's just that they never worry about that. They just like the juicing up of returns on the upside. So the downside just doesn't seem to exist for them.
Thank you for that. Let's go to the Basel Capital proposal. You know, I think there's a lot of misinformation about what's actually in it. Jeremy, for you, so, you know, can you give us just like maybe two top lines on like what's actually in the proposal? Like, what is the main thing the proposal seeks to accomplish? And then, based on that, like dispelling a lot of then what, you know, we've been hearing about the spillover in community banks, or, you know, this is gonna harm lending, like just based on top lines, how that's not true.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the Basel III endgame proposal that's on the table right now, the banking agencies proposed it last summer. The comment period ended in January. Basel III endgame would increase capital requirements on the 37 largest banks in the United States. That's 30 by a little bit. That's 37 out of 4,500. All the affected banks have more than $100 billion in assets. So it's a very small proportion of the US banking system. And the vast majority of that capital increase only hits the top 8 banks. So the top 8 global systemically important banks. For the so-called regional banks, your PNCs, US banks, Capital Ones, the capital increase is much smaller, in the single digits. And that's because the vast majority of the capital increase comes from banks' market risk activities. So after 2008, in the initial Basel III reforms, actually Basel 2.5, there were some reforms to market risk capital, how banks have to raise equity to support their trading activity. At the time, that was like a quick stopgap measure to respond to the immediate problems evident after 2008. Everybody intended and expected that there would be another round of market risk reforms. That's what the Basel Committee agreed to in 2017, and that's what we're trying to implement now in the United States. So, you know, as between market risk and credit risk is the capital the banks maintain to support lending. More than 2/3 of the proposed capital increase is attributable to market risk, to banks' trading activities, not to their lending activities. In fact, the risk weights for many categories of loans, including retail exposures like credit cards and commercial real estate exposures, would come down under this proposal. So I can't emphasize enough how much this proposal really focuses on the top 8 banks. Some mid-sized banks would be affected, but only by a little bit. If you are concerned about the structure of the US banking system, if you are concerned that the 8 biggest banks have too much power and have gotten overweight in the system, this proposal is pro-competitive, right? If you want PNC and US Bank and Capital One to be able to better compete with JP Morgan and Citi and Wells Fargo, this proposal will help them do it, because the 8 GSIBs will have to maintain more capital. It is nowhere near as onerous on those so-called Category 3 and 4 banks, and certainly it does not affect community banks at all. So the other 4,450 some odd banks in the country would, on average, benefit from this proposal.
Thank you. And just to even further emphasize what Jeremy just said, this is what 8 banks out of 5,000. 5,000 banks in the banking system.
Yeah, they control BPI.
Exactly.